So, what have you been noticing around this issue and what platform are we talking about?
So over 2025, I noticed this growing trend of artists posting about leaving Spotify and removing their catalog of music from the platform. And a lot of local artists talking about wanting to or having conflicting feelings about doing business with Spotify. So big artists like Sarah Harmer, Deerhoof, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, and even locally The Secret Beach have removed their music off the streaming platform. I heard from many Manitoba musicians who all shared a similar sentiment, unsubscribing as a listener and feeling conflicted about sharing their music on Spotify.
So, why specifically do artists say that they're making this choice? Like, why are they leaving?
I spoke with local musician Ed DeRoche, who's been playing and touring with local band Apollo Suns for 10 years. He's removing the band's music off Spotify in 2026 because he says the platform doesn't really support artists. He actually had a whole list of other reasons, but the final straw for him?
When they started allowing ICE and DHS in the U.S. to start advertising ICE recruitment videos, that was truly disgusting to me.
So he's talking about a move Spotify made in October to start running recruitment ads for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE. Since then, a lot of artists have been making noise.
So, if the recruitment ads for ICE were, as he put it, the final straw, what were the other reasons that led up to this?
People are also critical of investments made by the platform's CEO. So in the summer, news broke that Spotify co-founder and CEO Daniel Ek, through his investment firm Prima Materia, led a $693 million investment round into Helsing. It's a German defense company funding the development of AI military tech. Ek is also the chairman of Helsing. And that's not the only scrutiny of Spotify's connection to AI. AI-generated music is becoming more common on the platform, taking the streaming and playlist spots of musicians, and Spotify is, as Vancouver musician Dan Mangan puts it,
treating music like audio wallpaper, is something that rubs a lot of artists the wrong way. They're investing in AI music, generative AI music, and for a long time they've done this practice where they've essentially realized that they could pay less royalties if they acquired huge catalogs of sort of like mood music and pay out a smaller royalty rate than they would for normal, licensed music. And in doing so, prioritized that what they called perfect fit content and deprioritized, real artists.
So for those real artists, as Mangan puts it, it also comes down to money. An ongoing criticism from artists and even consumers is artist compensation.
Yeah, we've heard that for a long time, that artists aren't getting compensated properly has been one of the concerns. I love what he said there. Just the turn of phrase is staying with me, I should say, rather, where he said treating music like audio wallpaper.
Audio wallpaper.
Yeah, that's quite a phrase. So let's get to the money. How much are artists getting paid then?
That payout? It's an estimated 0.003 cents to 0.005 cents per stream. That's one listen. So that means 10,000 streams of a song would earn you between, $30 to $50. So I spoke with a few different artists to find out how much they actually make from Spotify. We'll go back to Ed DeRoche from Winnipeg band Apollo Suns. Their 2023 album Departures was released through a record label. The record has approximately 700,000 streams, and it made around $1,800 from 1 year of streams on Spotify. Now, someone might hear that and think, well, that's a pretty big paycheck, But Ed spent about $40,000 to make that record. And then we go to Dan Mangan, who we just heard from. He says this year has been a pretty good fiscal year because it's an album release year. He put out his record Natural Light in May. He shared he's made around $3,500 per month off that album. Now, again, you might think, big amount, but that streaming income doesn't always go straight into the pockets of those artists. I think often people forget that a career in music means that you're running a business. And when you get to a certain level in your career, there's a whole team operating that business. Artist management, music licensors, distributors, and the label that represents you. So depending on the size of your business, those royalties are often getting quite the split.
So they're spreading them around to make everything work.
Exactly, yeah. So Dan Mangan has some big criticisms of Spotify, but his music is still on the platform. When I asked him about, if he was thinking about taking his music off, he said he would have to convince the label who makes the final call. So I went to a local label, co-owner of Odd Doll Records. I wanted to hear what she had to say, so I'll let Claire Boning explain.
I think it would depend on what other goals the artist has at the moment. With knowing that Spotify is one of those platforms that people look to for metrics, it would be really hard to pass on to a different streaming platform when a lot of industry people don't look at other ones like Tidal or Apple Music. Sometimes they do, but Spotify is still number one. So if the artist was really adamant about taking their music off of Spotify, I think we would listen to them, but we'd have to really think about how else we can measure those metrics and make them more visible to the public and to the industry stakeholders.
So with the right label and the right strategy, it's not an impossible task.
It may be not impossible, but yet, what keeps musicians on the platform?
So it seems like Spotify has become a bit of an industry standard, and especially when it comes to being discovered. When I asked Claire about what keeps people on Spotify, this is what she had to say.
It's not something that we would actually miss if an artist decided to leave Spotify because the revenue just isn't there for any of us. But something that makes it a little bit more complicated is that it is often the first place people look who are part of grant organizations, people who are running festivals, and people who are just looking to hire your artists.
So essentially, even though it doesn't pay much to have your music streaming on the platform, it pays to have it available. So artists aren't shy about the concept of playing for exposure. And I think it's kind of a modern example of that. It's what Dan Mangan calls
the lure of exposure that I mentioned. It's less than it's ever been on the platform, but it is still there. And a lot of artists are struggling with this sort of like constant, you're trying to sort of lead with your heart and lead with your ethical code and do things in a way that feels good. And you're also trying to, have a career in music, which is an impossibly hard task to do.
What did Spotify have to say about the musicians' criticisms and concerns that you've been reporting today?
So I reached out to Spotify, and a spokesperson told me in an emailed statement, quote, Spotify will continue to be the place where artists can find an audience and build a career, and independent artists are earning more from our platform than any other streaming service. In 2024, independent artists generated approximately half of the record $10 billion Spotify paid out to right shareholders, unquote.
So how do you see musicians' relationships with Spotify changing in the coming year, given what you've been saying?
I think the conversations on the ethics of streamings will be ongoing, but honestly, I didn't get a simple answer from anyone in the music industry that I spoke to. A few Manitoba artists I heard from were planning to take their music off of Spotify in the new year, and well, the new year is here. But aside from just making noise on the subject, there was a different direction and hope that I heard from most people that I spoke with. The return to analog media and enjoying music the old school way. Apollo Sun's Ed DeRoche says to decrease dependence on Spotify, he wants to see people out at shows, buying a physical copy of the record that you can hold in your hands and take home and spin, or even just buying merch that you can wear to promote the music that you love. Dan Mangan said that his form of protest is talking about it so much in hopes that the idea of pulling your music off of Spotify wouldn't be so much of a big deal. But as musicians are speaking up about their concerns to Spotify, Odd Doll Records' Claire Boning says it's a bit of a tough ask to get people to move away from streaming on the platform.
I don't really see much of an alternative. I think a lot of the general population has been pretty spoiled with having all this music at their fingertips for a small amount of money each month. And I think it's going to be hard to try and convince people to spend a lot more money on physical albums.
All right, May. Well, thank you for coming in with your report.
Thanks so much, Marcy.